Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for taking time out of your busy day to join our webinar. The title of today's session is, Are you ready to harness the power of AI? And this is brought to you in collaboration between Cielo, Costa and Ringfence Solutions, a company that we've partnered with for the last couple of years, and very much looking forward to the session that we've got planned for you today. Just a little bit of admin. We are going to record the session, so if people have to drop off halfway through, we've got meetings in a little while, that's fine. We will share the recording with you all. Please feel free to share that on with your colleagues and anybody else after the meeting. We have turned people's mics and cameras off just while we're presenting. There is functionality in the room where you can ask questions at the top of the page there. So post them in or use the chat. We will allow time for questions at the end. We'll have plenty of time to have a bit of a discussion. But if there's anything burning or you just want to jot it down, please drop them into the chat. We can turn people's cameras and mics on and off as well if you want to engage in the presentation. So without further ado, we'll move on to the agenda slide. So we'll do some quick introductions, and then we're going to run a quick poll of what the level of AI adoption in your organization is right now. And Ben's going to walk us through the modern, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous digital world that we live in today and how it relates to information. We're going to talk about AI. Of course, we are. Not a day goes by where we don't see either a new use case or a risk or a success story coming through. Of course, we're going to link this back to our methodology and some of the projects that we've delivered previously. We're going to do that without naming any clients, so we'll try and keep it generic, but hopefully you'll follow along with us. And then at the end we'll have a bit of time for closing. We'll allow plenty of time for questions, as I've mentioned, and then we'll run one more poll just around how fit you think your information is right now. So quick introductions. I'm Adrian Gibbons. I lead the business consulting team at Cielo Costa. Prior to working here, I was a lifetime management consultant for EY. I did a big stint in London, mainly in central government. Then, as you might be able to tell from my slightly funny accent, that I did nearly 10 years in Australia, in Perth. My background is mainly big, complex business change and transformation projects across the whole piece, from strategy to working client side, looking after the change management all the way through to service delivery. Work closely with the police, MI5, MI6, children's hospitals, a real mix. So Cielo Costa started business consulting this year with a focus on three main areas. You can see them below. Sort of more traditional business analysis and design, the product management and adoption piece, and then compliance and governance, which is where this data governance and information sort of sits today. I'll hand over to Ben, and Ben, you can introduce yourself.
Thank you, Adrian. So yes, similar to Adrian, I've had lots of years, 30 plus, in the corporate world. Started off in nuts and bolts of IT and various aspects of that, and then moved all the way on up to IT director. And then the last corporate role I had was CIO at Circle Health Group, which again is the crossover where I also met and worked with Cielo Costa there as well. So basically came out of that in summer 2022 and always wanted to, felt I had something to share more widely and hopefully help other organizations with. And that's where I basically then sat back and looked at, okay, well, what do I think has worked over the last 3 or 4 iterations, 15 years or so for me? And I came up with and pulled together what I've called my Ringfence toolkit, and also the approach we'll touch upon today in terms of information fitness. So that's me, and I guess I'll carry on from there, and Adrian, just keep running through. Okay, great stuff. So let's start with a little bit of audience participation. So let me just switch that to the actual Mentimeter slide itself. So hopefully, if people are familiar with Mentimeter, this should be fairly straightforward. You can either go to menti.com at the top and use the code that's on the screen, 27733861, or hopefully you can scan the QR code and that'll take you straight there. But if people would like to start doing that, and then what this question's about is just trying to get a sense across the room as to where different people and organizations are in terms of actually starting to get to grips with and try and use and get value out of AI. So, one person's already in, brilliant. So please carry on. We'll give it a few seconds and see how it develops. It's always nice to be able to get this real-time feedback. So the last webinar I did, we did have one brave soul who who actually selected the achieving tangible benefits. So I almost feel obligated that if someone selects that, then we almost should have a round of applause and almost ask them to explain a bit more at some point or put it in the Q&A. Excellent. So when we got 7 out of 20 odd. I'll give it a few more seconds just so that people might have still be getting to grips and getting to Mentimeter. And just to forewarn you, as Adrian says, there will be just one more bit of audience participation before the end. So if you hang on to your logins to Mentimeter, then that'll be hopefully make it quicker next time around. Okay, how are we doing? That's now 10. We'll give it another second or so. There we go. Yeah. Good. So, and again, the results here, I mean, I've run this now a number of times in different webinars, and I'd say these aren't atypical at all. You've got a number of organizations and people who haven't started yet. You've got, you do get that spike in the middle where people are saying, they're in progress and they're doing something with AI and beavering away with it. But you get very few towards the top end of this. I mean, we've got one here where, there's an AI solution live and working, but probably too early to tell by the look of that as to whether it's that they judge it as actually achieving tangible benefits or not yet. So yeah, that's a pretty reasonable spread, and I think it reflects probably where a lot of organisations are with AI at the moment. And in fact, there's quite a few organisations now who have probably jumped in and are in progress and are now sort of perhaps wishing they'd have thought about it a bit more beforehand, or perhaps they'd done it a different way and perhaps even backing away from it a little bit. So I think we've seen the hype cycle and people are now getting to grips with the reality of what's AI about. Okay, just going back to the presentation. So so when I was thinking about this and what the world feels like that we're in at the moment, then I came across this acronym which Adrian very bravely attempted and got right earlier. Which is this one called VUCA. So you have to be careful how you say it. But it comes from, it's an approach or a way of thinking about the world that I think came about in the late 1980s from a group of economists. And also as, at the time you had the Cold War that was happening and lots of tensions geopolitically across the world, not dissimilar to what we're perhaps seeing today. But I thought it was a really good way of thinking about, how it feels to people in terms of the world we now live within. And what it stands for is, obviously volatility is that, things don't stand still, and increasingly they don't stand still. Change is there's the old phrase, change is a constant. I think that's never more true than now. I think uncertainty, things are happening now that perhaps you wouldn't have predicted or you couldn't have foreseen in the last 10, 15 years, and then that's happening more often. Certainly complexity. I mean, AI itself is massively complex. I mean, if you look at the number of inputs that some of these AIs are now taking in, they're range into the billions of things that it's monitoring and then trying to then detect patterns through the way that the actual nodes have been set up, and then looking at the output. So again, the opportunity for unexpected or unintended butterfly effects. A butterfly flaps its wings in South America and there's a hurricane on the other side of the Atlantic. That's the other sort of thing that comes through. And ambiguous, I think. I mean, everyone's probably well aware of the fact that with AI and some of the generative stuff in terms of voices and deep fakes and everything else, then the age-old phrase "seeing is believing" or "hearing is believing." That's something that we're having to question now and look hard at. Okay, what's the information telling us? And I think you don't have to look too far in terms of the last 3 or 4 years, and even now, to look at just how hyper-connected the whole world is. I mean, a tanker ship going sideways in the Suez Canal had a massive impact, not just on global shipping, but on prices around the world. COVID, obviously, perhaps we shouldn't have been surprised about, seeing as there was a pandemic 100 years ago, but again, came out of the blue as far as we're concerned, and we had to deal with it, and it changed our world and the way we feel about things completely. Uncertainty, Middle East at the moment is very unstable, as is Ukraine and other places. And again, it comes back to those geopolitics coming into play again. Don't know which way that's going to go. Hopefully it will settle down. And then ambiguous, well, you've got quite a few things out there where there's the UK elections literally in a week's time, and then US later on this year. And it really is a very real worry, I think, about, okay, what's the impact of misinformation and disinformation, and perhaps even with state actors, on those democratic election processes. So, lots of things really in the world where I just wanted to sort of try and make sure that I sort of came into, this is the world that we're now part of, and then start talking about, okay, how I see, how information is such a, integral part of that going forwards. So, I mean, when I think about and talk about information and technology, the only parallel I can really equate it to is going back to the Industrial Revolution, which is almost 300 years ago. And I think the issue there is that if you go back to the invention of steam power and how that then changed the world dramatically and affected people's jobs and all the rest of it, then yes, it did, and it was quite brutal at times, but it wasn't probably as fast as what we're going through now. And if you look at the digital computing and to the right hand of this, then yes, digital computing in different forms have been around for 80 years. The internet, 30 years, I can remember BI before internet, or pretty much just about, because I'm old enough to do that. The cloud is the other thing that's really come into play as well, is that everything is now connected, Internet of Things. And then of course AI, I mean, technically has been around for 30, 40 years and talked about, but it's only really because it builds on top of now the big data we've collected and the interconnectivity that you're really, really ChatGPT was the thing that launched that more into the public psyche in terms of being something which is a real game changer and looked like black magic in terms of, what it could do for the world. And I guess the key thing I'd also point to is, just the sheer volumes that we're talking about. I think actually, it goes before this graph. 2002, I think, was the acknowledged sort of tipping point when the world moved, more than 50% away from paper and other forms of media to digital was then the predominant media. And since then, it's just grown exponentially. And you can see this graph is, 2024, and then it projects into 2025. But that's the amount of data that's being generated and is used day to day. And I think the other thing, as the little dial says here, it's not just the volumes of data, it's the speed that it now comes at us as individuals and organizations, which is the thing that probably, most people feel and in lots of cases are sort of struggling with, how do you deal with that? So I thought I'd just do a little bit of a history lesson to show people how used we've got to things and how things changed. That is what Google looked like about 20 years ago, when there were other competitors and search engines that were available and that people went to. But obviously, we take it for granted now as part of our daily lives. The first Apple iPhone is very much the first smartphone really in terms of that interface and was revolutionary. And again, we take that for granted and perhaps feel it's in some ways almost too welded to our arms and intrusive on our lives at times. Amazon, I used to at one point work for a company which had offices in Chicago. And I quite vividly remember at one point being over there and actually walking across, well, not Americans don't walk very far, but I walked across to the mall, which is across the way, and there was an Amazon bookshop, because that's what Amazon started as. And again, we don't even think about that now. We take it for granted in terms of, Amazon is global and a go-to place, as well as some of the emerging ones from perhaps China and other places that start to try and get into that space as well. And I guess really it's the whole Internet of Things, the connectivity is something which we take for granted. It's a good thing in some ways, it's a bad thing in others. You think about Ring doorbells, but then you also think about the fact that cyber criminals can potentially go in and hack different things. And then of course, social media. And I think, when you look at the graph of the data that's being generated there and how much we're dealing with globally, you kind of think with the amount of computing power and processing power and storage that we've now got at our disposal, that we would be, I don't know, hyper efficient, and we'd be taking things easy because we'd applied it to work and challenges and problems, and that meant that humans could have a more relaxed life. But that isn't the way it feels, and I think the way a lot of this power has gone is also into things like gaming and social media, rather than necessarily making the world a more efficient place in some ways. And I think that's another sort of modern day challenge that we have to deal with. So basically, painting the picture of the world that we're in, what it feels like, and then also, I really do truly feel that this is, the equivalent, if not, greater in some ways than the Industrial Revolution. I certainly think it's going to be quicker than the Industrial Revolution in terms of us pushing through into a new information age. So I talked about consultancy and approach and everything. So one of the key things that I sort of sat back and thought about when I started Ringfence, and then sort of taken forward from there, is almost, well, okay, I grew up and did my professional training, and then I've worked in IT, information technology, for almost 30 years. And that's great, and learned a lot and enjoyed what I did with massive digital transformations and all the rest of it. But fundamentally now, I think there's just so much information out there, you have to almost step back a bit and say, well, actually, what is the information for? So before you start investing in technology and security and AI, which costs money, you have to sort of go back to first principles, and that's what I've sort of done with Ringfence. And the other key thing to say about this is that in this information age we're now entering, information is almost like the gold dust or the oil that makes the economy turn. The organisations and individuals that know what information they need and look after it best and make the most from it, they will be the most successful. So, and there's also so much out there you could choose from, that you have to now think about it a bit more carefully and be conscious about it. And the other thing about information nowadays, there's so much more of it. I pick out 3 mega trends that I would particularly talk about, which means that it's different now to what it was, say, 10, 15, 20 years ago, because obviously the amount of information has been increasing. I think the mega trends that I would talk to here is obviously the cloud. So maybe 10, 15 years ago, if someone said to me as a IT manager or director, where's your information? I'd say, well, it's in that server room or a data center, and I know exactly who can get to it because it's got locked doors around it, and I know who, I bought the tin that it runs on. You just can't do that now. In the modern world, every single business, whatever size or scale, will have some and probably increasing reliance on the cloud, which immediately means you've got a fragmented digital supply chain, and other people automatically, because they're either hosting it for you or helping you run it, have access to your information. So that's one key thing which I think is really different and changed, and I can't see it going any other way than the way it's going. And then in parallel with that, obviously cyber threats. I mean, everyone's aware of cyber threats and cyber criminals. You probably saw the stories last week about the NHS ransomware attack on a third party, which was in the cloud, and the impact that's having on people. And that isn't going to go away either, because cyber criminals, it's very lucrative if you look at the amounts they make, and it's going to be an arms race that we have to deal with into the future and work out how we handle it. And then the third mega trend, which I think is related to these two in some ways, is that because of the first two, a lot of key stakeholders, whether they're key stakeholders of your particular business, or whether they're regulators, or whether they're customers, or other people like that, then they're increasingly aware that this is a fragmented and exposed digital supply chain, and there's bad actors out there. And fundamentally what they're starting to do, and I'm seeing this with a lot of the clients that I've worked with and some of the ones we've worked jointly on with Cielo Costa, is they're getting asked questions which basically equate down to, can we trust you with our data? We don't want to work with an organization where they can't demonstrate that they're in good shape in terms of the way they look after information, and they're not going to be an embarrassment, or they're not going to be in a situation like the London hospitals where they can't operate properly because they've been exposed to a ransomware attack. So certainly due diligence questions and looking for that level of assurance, I think, is coming through. And I think the other thing to also point out is that when you look at the E of ESG, then AI is not cheap when it comes to the planet. The amount of energy it takes at the moment to run AI, and data centers and NVIDIA chips and all the rest of it, then it is an expensive technology, and certainly Microsoft are pricing that way. If you look at £30 per user per month for Copilot, then again you need to make sure that you can justify why you need that and what you're going to do with it before jumping in and investing in that. So as I said, there's lots of situations you can point to now that increasingly information is certainly with its personal data. You look at the breach in Northern Ireland last year with the police force, where human error meant they released the details of a large number of the serving officers over there into a society where that was potentially very harmful to do so. Information is increasingly affects the well-being of ourselves and others, and organisational success. And the way I hook it all together and talk about it, coming back to the original question I sort of set myself as going back to basics, is okay, when I said what is information for, and this is what, again, I work with clients to help them interpret this within their organisations, then I say, well, if you're not going to use the information you've collected for either decision making, and you need good quality information to make good quality decisions, or for action taking, and it could be, obviously to treat a patient, you need to have accurate and up-to-date patient notes, or you have to do it for record keeping, or you choose to do it for record keeping, then why are you actually processing and storing and incurring costs on that information? You need to sort of go back to those basics and say, what do you need information for? And the overall thing that I help organisations with is it's this virtuous circle that I'm talking about here, and I'll come on to that a bit more later on, in that obviously if you can make faster, good quality decisions, then you can get to the taking the actions quicker as well. And if you can take actions quickly and then record the right things, then you can also create this feedback loop where you're then also monitoring the impact of the actions you've taken, and then hopefully it becomes a much stronger virtuous circle and leads to better sort of overall value creation for an organisation. And that's really what I guess my overall principle is behind this philosophy when I'm talking about information fitness and the various elements that I then help people work with on this. So a bit about AI. You'll see at the top here, I've called it augmented intelligence. So I'm already giving away a little bit about where I am on the fence with this, but I'll just explain a bit why and why I position it and how I position it within this model. So as human beings, we are great. You have lots of capabilities, but we are limited. We are obviously biological, and evolution for biological evolution is quite a slow process over thousands and millions of years, and we're as part of that, we've developed the 5 senses we have, and sight is by far and away the one that absorbs and processes the most information at any one time. But coming back to what I said earlier, the sheer volumes of data in different formats and the speed at which it comes at us means that we are probably already now overloaded in a lot of cases with how much we can actually handle ourselves from a natural biological point of view. And that's the way I view AI or augmented intelligence at the moment, is that a lot of the systems that are out there and things that perhaps we wouldn't have called AI earlier, but we've been doing this for years effectively. I use Waze as a tool on my phone for sat nav and find my way from A to B. I mean, that one there is something which is taking lots of data points from individuals, and it's helping with the decision making by sort of guiding me, assembling all those together, and then telling me the best way to go. That's a classic example of almost what I'm talking about here. Is that there's no, yes, I could in theory do that calculations myself, but I haven't got the time and we've got the processing power behind it. So why not let it do it? And then I can make the decision about whether I'm going to follow the route and get stuck down a road under a bridge or something, or go a different way. A bit of human judgment on top of it. And then the other scenario that people talk about, and this is obviously the stuff of movies in terms of Terminator and Matrix and whatever, is within sort of the model I'm talking about here. I think the next evolution perhaps of digital intelligence would then be that actually get to the stage where true artificial general intelligence exists, would be where the entities that we're talking about actually become self-aware in the way that humans are and a few other species, and actually can start to make their own decisions and set their own goals. So scary potential stuff. I don't think we're there yet, and I think that's also when you look around the world and keep an eye on things like the way that governments and different places are trying to then work out, what the regulation should be. I mean, the EU's got an AI Act now, which is coming into force, which is risk-based and says, okay, what sort of scenarios are acceptable in that society, and which ones aren't, and what the guardrails are around that. And I think hopefully that's what we'll see continue to evolve and come to a conclusion with worldwide on it. Not that again that criminals are necessarily going to sort of follow those, but at least it starts to set that understanding between society and governments, and to a degree between humanity and worldwide, trying to get the bar and the level right about, okay, well, how are we going to work with AI going forward? So again, interesting, challenging times in terms of that. So talking through some of the things I've seen in the last year or so, I've picked out in terms of risks, issues, and successes with AI, and all of the what I should say is that we'll send out the PDF of this PowerPoint slide later on, and the links on here should work, so you can go and look for yourself behind these if you want. So lots of different aspects of our lives and global lives and society that this is touching and in some ways overturning, which again, to me, is this whole thing around we're going through a much more fast-paced revolution, digital revolution, AI revolution, compared to the industrial revolution of 300 years ago. So probably you've all heard about the strike last year, which meant that loads of writers and actors went on strike, and they had ended up coming up with a deal. So yes, they brokered a deal which they put in place, but I guess the issue here is that was done really quickly. And already you're starting to see some of the creaks in that and the cracks in that, in terms of people saying, well, hold on, what about this or what about that? And it doesn't quite work and it's not fair. So, again, you're seeing regulation and deals and things being rushed in, but because it's being done so quickly, the odds are it's going to be an ongoing process over the next X number of years to try and get it right. Copyright. So this is something which there's a number of lawsuits already in progress, and you can look at this here, but certainly with ChatGPT and other ones, I mean, obviously they took effectively a copy of the internet and they fed lots of material in there, which lots of other people and organizations are arguing, well, they didn't have the right to do that because it wasn't their copyright. So, that's another thing which is interesting. The other thing that I've seen on the back of that is I did see there's been various attempts in the last year in the States in particular, where people who've created AI platforms have actually tried to get the output of those platforms registered as being copyright to that AI. And one of the interesting and probably hopeful things that's been successfully done there is that each time that someone's tried to do that, the US judges have turned around and said, no, only humans can have a copyright, which feels to me like a reasonable position to take. But it's interesting that's been challenged, and is obviously almost challenging the whole notion of what copyright is, and is it a human thing, or can other things like digital AIs claim copyright as well? Interesting one here. This is where, if you look behind the text on this one, the AI bias that it's talking about, the most well-known example of this is Amazon created an AI solution for their recruitment process. So basically being able to screen the candidates that were submitting their CVs. Unfortunately, when they trained it, they used their real life CVs they'd had over a period of time, but the vast majority of those were male. So hence it was then immediately, or fairly quickly realised that it's actually being biased because of the way it had been trained towards male candidates rather than female candidates. And then effectively they had to they had to stop it because that was proven. And obviously you can't have bias against based on sort of gender. And basically they had to scrap that whole solution. I don't know how many. I mean, obviously they can afford it because they're Amazon. In terms of millions of dollars of effort and whatever, because they hadn't thought about that and how they should go about this as part of their actual recruitment process and the design of the AI. And then this one here, I mean, obviously privacy, people are now, it's well established in terms of personal data with GDPR, but again, that doesn't go away with AI. And again, you need to think quite carefully about, okay, well, the data that you're feeding into it for training it or for it to work on, how does that align with those privacy concerns? And again, if you look behind the headlines on this, you've already got various lawsuits and disputes around the world where people have, gone to the wrong side of that line and are now potentially facing consequences of it in terms of the law courts. So all sorts of issues from this, and a lot of these are from people who are, it's almost like the legislation and the thinking is having to try and catch up with the reality of what the technology can do, and people jumping into it. And then the one that I'd point to as a success and contrast that to a degree with the other ones is something which I felt it went a little bit under the actual under the radar really in terms of the reporting of this. This is it's a UK-based solution which has been done by a third party in conjunction with a number of NHS trusts. And what it is it's a AI solution which has been developed slowly and carefully over about 3 or 4 years to look at helping radiologists to detect cancer in early stages within breast cancer in this case as well. Sorry, Adrian, you got your hand up. Is that deliberate or just a?
No, it's deliberate, Ben. I mean, the news stories keep coming thick and fast. Just this morning in the car on the way to drop the kids off, I heard on the radio that researchers had used ChatGPT to write essays, and that the markers of those were unable to distinguish between those that were real essays and those that had been written by AI. There's a news story on the BBC about record labels taking, people to court over copyright violation in potential landmark cases. And then Bill Gates, think of him what you will, but he's a smart guy. He's talking about using AI to combat climate change. But the kicker in the story for me was it must be used by people with good intent.
Yes.
That's a little ominous, I thought. Yeah, a little worrying. But yeah, it's just everywhere, isn't it? It's just a normal part of life now.
Absolutely, and again, the way so a lot of these ones on here I say risk issues, but the success I'm pointing to, and the reason for I guess I'm pointing on this one, is that it shows that as far as this solution was concerned, basically where it ended up is they've now got it working properly. They've done it in conjunction and collaboration with consultant radiologists and all the stakeholders. They've done it slowly and carefully. What they haven't tried to do is say, oh, this magic AI is now available. Let's just throw it in there as a technology and all will be well, because that's probably what ended up with the other stories that are on here. But this one here has been carefully and slowly and considered in its approach. And in terms of the net results, I mean, if you read the news story, there's a lady on there who talks about the fact that her mother and her sister had what she calls the big C, and it was only picked up, at a certain stage, and therefore involved surgery and quite long-term radiotherapy treatment to get them through it, which they did. But as she says, she was the one who was picked up by this AI solution, which has been carefully, trained and curated and has oversight on it within the NHS. And basically, she classified it. She didn't have the big C; she had the little c, because it was picked up when it was tiny, and she only needed sort of a couple of treatments of radiotherapy, and that was it. Job done. And it's also, you think about the long-term impact of that on the NHS and the public purse, and it's also potentially going to save loads of money because these things are being picked up much sooner and more reliably, by AI, which has been carefully trained and is being overseen. And the radiologists are happy with that because they see the benefits of it, and they can then deal with the more complex cases and then sort of checking it as well. So the contrast to me is it's about making sure that you're thinking about it. You're not looking for a silver bullet. You're not looking for a magic wand. I think that's the hype cycle and the fear of missing out with AI that's been coming through for the last year or so, and people want to jump on the bandwagon. And I think that's from our original survey we did, the Mentimeter one. That's why I think we're seeing, you're seeing some organisations now are actually deliberately or have been sort of hanging back to try and let this settle down. And even some of the ones who are in progress are potentially then sort of reconsidering about, well, am I going to get there, or how much money do I put into this, and are they going to be hit by some of these risks and issues as well? So thinking about it carefully, considered, and making sure that you understand what you're going to get out of it, and it's done in a very targeted way. Basically, it's no different to any other technology. Make sure you're going to get the benefit out of it, and you know what you're doing with it, and you do it carefully before you jump into it and get going. Okay, and I did a little bit of research back in the last year and looked around to see what some of the bigger players were saying about this as well, and I won't read them all out, but but the overall the overall consensus seems to be from and you'll know, Adrian, with your background and EY and the rest of it, these people do take a long hard look at this across lots of clients and then sort of summarize it together. But basically what they're saying is that you need to make sure you've got some sort of structure around this, and you've thought about it, and you've got governance, and increasingly the one at the bottom that's interesting as well is about, if you are going to use AI, then the regulators and shareholders, and this is certainly what the EU AI Act is saying, is then you need to be able to demonstrate that you've got the right sort of governance around it as well, and you've thought about this properly, and you're giving it the right sort of continuous oversight, like Bill Gates. Make sure the good people are running it rather than the bad people. Not that you can stop the bad people adopting AI, of course, but at least they'll be breaking the law and seem to be working outside of what's acceptable as well. And then, so coming back to, so I've talked about information fitness as a philosophy and approach. So what I then do, and this is where I then effectively have already been working with lots of clients of my own and some that myself and Adrian and Cielo Costa have been doing jointly. But this is really then just sort of giving a summary of, okay, well, how do you go about helping organisations and leaders of organisations to do this properly and build this framework, which means that not only are they got the right sort of oversight and governance around their information and they're making the most of it, but then they can also then link that into AI if they want to going forwards, and hopefully avoid the risks and issues, and then be more successful about what they're doing with it. So probably won't surprise people to know that it starts with, you've got to start from somewhere. It's an inventory. So, the way I talk about that, and I've got the tools and templates and spreadsheets and things to make it easy for people to do this in a sort of collaborative way. It starts with, first of all, knowing what your key data sets are. It sounds simple, but unless you know what you've got, then and what you're doing with it, then you can't really do much more beyond that. And then the other thing, which I think is increasingly key, and a lot of organizations have sort of perhaps lost touch of a bit because they're focusing on the information technology rather than the information they need to run their business and the data sets that stores that, is it's then very much around making sure that there's an agreed, and it needs to be org-wide understanding of what is the, what does information mean to that organizational business, and I'm talking about what I define here, and I've got templates for and I've used in different organizations, is what I call a core information model. So the best way of describing this is, at Circle Health Group, when I joined the board there, probably took me about a couple of months to twig that, I had peers there who were the chief medical officer, the chief operations officer, and they were using these phrases, which, are pretty standard ones for healthcare, like period of care and episode of care. And they were talking to each other and nodding as if they meant the same thing. And it took me about 2 months to realize, and by a little bit of digging underneath the covers a bit, about, well, actually, your understanding of period of care is very different to the other person's understanding of period of care. And that's a pretty fundamental concept, given that period of care in healthcare is a pretty key measure of performance and activity, because it's when a patient first makes contact with the organisation, all the way through any consultations, diagnostics, treatments, and therapies and whatever, all the way through until they leave the organisation. And if you can't agree on what the actual definition of that is, then how are you measuring the performance of the organisation? And how are you structuring the information systems to allow reporting on that? And me as CIO, that I rapidly realised that was a major issue and challenge, because everyone wasn't on the same page. So the way I went about solving this was, it ended up being about 20-page document. The first couple of pages were, high-level patient journey. So getting the key understanding of what a typical patient journey and the key elements of that were and who was involved. A high-level data map of all the key terms in private healthcare, including payors and consultants, and it can be quite complex, but and how they at a high level relate to each other. And then pretty much the rest of the document after that then turned into a high-level data dictionary, which basically gave an absolutely nailed down, agreed definition of what we meant by period of care and episode of care. And it started to set the terminology that we wanted people to use and understand across the organisation. And the other thing that turned into was, once that had been agreed at the highest level with the exec, and they said, yes, we're happy with that, and that's good, let's align our systems and our reporting to that over time, then you also ended up with that becoming a standard document that any new starter at Circle Health Group was, and still is, referred to and taken through as part of their joining, because we wanted to make sure that people understood how important information was to the business from the first day they joined, and that they understood what we meant by certain terminology. And that, I think, was a really big thing in helping to then bring together around digital transformation strategy and reporting and the rest of it, really unlocking the power of information for Circle in terms of how it's gone from strength to strength, really, in terms of its way forwards. So that's a key thing that a lot of organisations neglect and end up dealing with just the individual systems without any of that core understanding across the business. And you can't do that in isolation, as I said. You have to do that with the execs and other key people and key stakeholders. When we did it at Circle, we also looked externally and said, well, there's no point in us reinventing the wheel. We found a nice language that we could use, which was already out there in the global healthcare environment. It's called FHIR, which is Fast Health Code Interoperable Resources, and it's an open standard for how organisations should share information. And the terminology that used, we made sure that what we built internally was aligned to that. So it made it a lot easier for Circle Health Group to then start thinking about sharing information with the NHS or other providers and people as well, because we're talking the same language. So really important to get that bit done. And then the other bit, obviously, that I help with quite a lot is then, okay, and then how do you plug it in to the right governance forums, and it varies per organisation. You don't want to have anything bureaucratic, but you do want to have something where it's very clear, how does this link into, and you have the control over it. The other key thing to say there is that, the other key thing about these data sets is about ownership of data sets. And that's the other thing you can do with governance. You can start to be very clear about, okay, well, just because it's in an IT system, a CRM system, it doesn't mean that the IT person owns it. You need to find the right person in the business who owns it, because they're the ones who should be making decisions on security and technology and involved in that, and also looking at the investment that goes into it. You can't go, obviously the law says that you need to be aware of where personal data is across all that, because if you don't know where it is and you can't show that you're handling it properly, then you're breaking the law, and that has consequences, and potentially quite expensive consequences. And then fundamentally, if you establish this as your core understanding across the business, then this is the thing that then drives a lot better understanding of where your crown jewels are, so which are your most important data sets. And that's also in terms of things like making sure you get the data quality right for the decision making. And also fundamentally, it drives this, everyone being on the same page and having this understanding, alignment and focus, which I've certainly found makes it a lot easier for people to think about, okay, well, rather than being disjointed or not knowing which data sets or technology or security you want to adopt first, then work on getting the ones which are your crown jewels done first, and have that understanding about who owns them at the top. And it makes things run a lot more smoothly across organizations than perhaps they used to. So that's just a sort of summary, and obviously you can find more information about this if you want to, or talk about it, but that's the sort of thing that I help organizations generally get themselves in better shape for, in terms of their core information fitness. What does it look and feel like? Well, this is a bit of a before and after picture, I guess, but certainly when I sat back and thought about the last 3 or 4 iterations I've been in large scale corporate climates, then typically every time I've gone in, it's looked and felt a bit like this, where it's a bit of a messy assembly of cogs in terms of IT and information in the middle, and they sort of grind against each other at times, and certainly doesn't help the linkage between decision making and action taking and record keeping, with sort of the consequences you've got there. And then certainly when I've left places, or what I'm doing now with clients and helping to get in place, is actually this much better understanding, this much better and stronger, more powerful linkage between these 3 things, because that is what drives an organization. And also, you don't want to be worrying about information. You want to know you're in control of it. You want to know it's tidy and well organized, and you're making good decisions on what you're doing with it. And then basically that you can get on with business, and it almost runs in the background, but runs well, is I guess the nirvana for this as well. And that includes AI, select it carefully and wisely, and then hopefully it's feeding into the same sort of framework and decision making. So I talk about information because that's the bit that I'm focusing on and the bit I'm passionate about, and I feel sort of strongly about. But you can't do it in a vacuum. I can't just go in there and tell people that they need to do X, Y, and Z with their information. And the other sort of thing I lean on a bit, and this is from Gartner as an overall concept, is what they call capabilities and enablers. And what Gartner says is that you can break down any function or capability within an organization, whether it's a call center or whatever it might be, and you can look at it from different aspects, and then look at each of those underlying enablers in turn. So you might have heard people talk about people, process, and technology, which is all very well and good when you're talking about change. I would say, where's the information? And actually, I'd add in environment as well, because I think certainly in the new hybrid world that we're living in, and people working in the office and at home as well, then the environment that you're working in can also become important and needs to be consideration. So, you can't do it in isolation. Yes, I focus on information and how it supports the business, but you also need to think about these other enablers. And if you are going to then make changes, which is what I end up doing, with clients and helping them with, is I also have to be cognizant and think about, okay, rules and processes as part of the governance. There's training of people. The environment it takes place in, you have to be careful of sometimes, depending on what sort of data, personal data you're looking at, how secure it is. And then the key thing I'd say is technology, and again, AI fits into this bucket of technology, and also heavily intertwined with data it's trained on and then feeds on, is you really should make sure you understand your information first, and then only after then start to look at selecting your technology, and also security, which comes into technology as well around that, because otherwise you could end up spending a lot of time and effort and perhaps money, and perhaps wasting that time and effort and money if you get the wrong technology, or it sits on the shelf because you're not ready to apply it. And that could be because your information isn't in good shape. So key thing is it's got to be holistic, and that's the other thing that I try and make sure that that view is taken as part of the works that I help people with and help clients with. And then coming back to, I guess, the bigger picture, and how I think organizations will be successful with this in the future, and AI in particular, then I guess, we've talked already about AI being a support for humans in terms of decision making, and long may it stay that way. But to do that, and to do it successfully, I think that organizations are going to have to understand not just their own internal data sets better and make sure they're in good shape to avoid things like, you've got to be thinking about, is the data you're going to be using to train your AI in-house with your own data sets, is that going to result in bias or any issues like that? You've got to start thinking a bit more carefully about that. And then in particular, because the whole world is going to carry on using third-party data sets and cloud solutions, then you've also got to start thinking about more carefully about, okay, what are you selecting in terms of the third parties and their data sets? Where do they get their data from for AI that you're going to be working with? And I think it's going to be a combination of those two, and people thinking carefully about it in their data strategy and business strategy as to why they need AI and where they're going to source the data from, which is then really going to be the sort of the distinction between the ones that dabble in AI and the ones that sort of then select it intentionally and then implement it carefully in a considered fashion to really get the benefits they want. And I think a key part of that is obviously going to be having a framework for having those discussions and having the right sort of questions to ask. But there are lots of benefits of doing this. As I said, the word provenance you hear in terms of things like works of art and whatever, but is it genuine? Can you trust it? I think is a key thing around the data sets side of things. I think the thing in the middle there about costs, keeping those under control is quite important in the modern world. I mean, long gone are the days where in the early days of the cloud, everyone was trying to tell you that you could have cloud storage which would increase forever and it'd be free. They've hooked us all now, and I think we can all see the cost of cloud storage is not going to be free. Okay, it's cheaper than it might be on premise, but again, if you're keeping information you don't need to keep and you haven't got a use for it, then get rid of it. You save money. And the same with the technology that you might select and security stuff. If you can be more granular about knowing where your crown jewels are, then perhaps be more granular and focused about where you apply the more expensive controls, because it's worth it and it's justified. And again, coming back to the one at the bottom, absolutely. I mean, this is the key thing that I'm doing, and my biggest client at the moment is a US-based multi-billion-dollar organization, and the reason they came to me, they weren't handling anything too sensitive like patient data, but they were getting asked questions in due diligence. I think I put one on my LinkedIn thing recently. It wasn't exactly the question, but it's very similar. But basically came down to their customers as part of due diligence asking questions like, "Are you GDPR compliant?" And on a scale of 0 to 5, and they, I'm helping them. At least now they can say they're on probably a 1 or 2, and then by the end of the year they'll be able to answer it with confidence as being a 3 or 4. But if they couldn't do that, then increasingly they're putting their revenue at risk, because customers and investors and other people are going to keep asking these questions going forwards. So definitely I think there's a lot of benefits around this, and the sort of the foundations that I look to help organizations with in terms of information fitness, I think are equally appropriate for before you do AI, but then also become almost critical when you start considering AI as well, which I guess is the point of what we're talking about today, is that don't just jump in there, and make sure that you feel that you're in a good enough position in terms of understanding your own data and how you control it before you then even really contemplate or start thinking about going and jumping into the AI technology as well. So coming back to the modern world, and I guess the key point I'm making is that I wouldn't even expect to even try to solve all of the problems that are out there and the way people feel about volatility and uncertainty, complexity and ambiguity. But what I hope I could at least help with in my own small way, and obviously through Costa has got other things they can help with in the consulting space. But at the very least, I think from an information point of view, I think I can help organizations to get a better understanding and control of the data sets that really matter to them, and know that they've got that a bit more of a grip on it. I can help them to bring clarity to why they need that information, and then challenge it when when you can't find a reason for it, then get rid of it, save some money. If you can do those two things, then hopefully you can make sure that as things change and you need to respond, then it's a lot easier to be agile if you know what you've got, and everyone's got the same understanding. Then it's much easier to sort of then turn and go in a different direction. And I guess all of this is then around as I said earlier, you really want to, given the volumes of information that's out there, the value of that to the organisation is its lifeblood, and need to make sure it's used properly. Then hopefully, with the sort of things that information fitness brings, then it means that if you get these things in place and right, then you can focus a lot more on your long-term vision for the business and executing and achieving that overall. So I said there'd be another bit of Mentimeter at the end, and then we'll sort of move on to questions. I think we're just about on time, which is good. So I'll switch to the Mentimeter slide, but this one here is, obviously before I started talking, you probably had only a vague idea of what I meant by information fitness. Hopefully by now you've got a slightly better one. So the Mentimeter this time round is really asking, the next slide is, okay, well, on a score of 0 to 10, where 0 is very poor, perhaps chaotic, or very, if nothing in place, and 10 is perfect, and you can't think of anything else that you'd do to improve it. It's really asking people to then sort of participate like they did earlier, and then just sort of to give a feel for where do they think they are on information fitness level. There we go, coming in, and you'll see it's quite a good Mentimeter. It gives you the sort of the spread of the results. You start to see the average curve behind it as well. Let's give it a bit. We've got 5 so far. Here we go. Give it a few seconds, settle down. And we've got now 6. There's a few more out there. Give it a few more seconds. Either that or people have logged off Mentimeter.
Yeah.
Okay, so again, that's not atypical. So again, I think it's a journey, is the way I'd express it, is that most organizations have something. But when I did the research, I did some wider research on this through LinkedIn and connections and surveys back in the last year. And what I found is that, there was only about 39% rate of the people who responded rated themselves as 7 or higher. So less than 40% were confident in terms of being in that top bracket of 7, 8, 9. And I think that's a similar result we're seeing here, and potentially means that, there is room for improvements that people are recognizing, and particularly as the world, and with AI requirements and cloud and cybersecurity, as those requirements are coming forward, then definitely there's potentially some room that people could, feel they could drive up their information fitness further. And again, obviously, if people want to talk about that, come and talk to Adrian myself, and we can talk in more detail. But that is not, again, atypical from when I've run this webinar in other places. That's a similar sort of graph that I've had in other places as well. Okay, so quick summary, and then we'll break for questions. So I guess, and I guess this is the heart of what I'm saying, and almost the key thing that I feel very passionate about, having been CIO and not on the hook for all the IT and information systems and governance around them in large scale organizations, is you need to develop this understanding of what's important to the organization and get that agreement, and also the knowledge of what are the key data sets. But probably the most critical bit there is making sure that there's that acknowledgement of the ownership at the C-suite level or leadership level, and that's a business person typically who owns that data set. As soon as you do that and people realize they're responsible for data, even if it isn't an IT system, in the same way there would be if it was on paper and kept records somewhere else, then that just makes the whole of the rest of the conversation so much easier. And talked about this and sort of the overall philosophy around, if you get this right, then it drives value creation a lot more quickly through, the better decision making, action taking, and record keeping being linked together. It's not something you do overnight. I'm not going to pretend there's a magic wand here. I mean, one of the reasons I called it information fitness is the same reason. People understand that from a physical fitness point of view, you don't just walk into a gym one day and then suddenly come out the next day as an Olympic athlete. It takes time and effort and application to get to where you want to be, and also communication. Like I said at Circle, getting that to the point where every new starter had that same understanding and that briefing. That is about building it into the DNA, about realizing what the importance of information is, and everyone's following the same sort of understanding and processes. And then really from an AI point of view, then, I guess that's the key thing that I'm saying, and it's not just me, these are the big players saying the same thing. You need to really make sure that you understand and are looking after and governing what you have in terms of data assets, internal and external, the ones you select, if you're going to be then successful in future AI. So, again, it's not rocket science. Some of it sounds common sense, but I think sometimes it's worth expressing the common sense to, you have to bring it forwards and remind people about this. And I guess the other key thing, and again, this comes back to this being a evolutionary sort of thing. We're going through a time of rapid change. I've talked about industrial revolution, moving into the information age, and how we're doing that a lot more quickly, and in some ways, potentially with wider fallout and more pain than before. And I think that's the other key thing, is that this is in some ways about survival, surviving and thriving. And from an evolutionary point of view, it is going to be, the ones that are fittest. And I'd say in terms of information fitness, that's one aspect of fitness that I can help with. And the ones that are fittest are the ones that will do the best. The ones that aren't that fit, well, we know what happens from an evolutionary point of view. They sort of risk falling behind or perhaps even dying out if they're not careful. So that's everything I had in terms of just talking, and I'm about on time. So I've got a little bit of time for questions if anyone's got anything in the chat.
I'll just chip in as well there, Ben, just at the end. So, wow, a lot to unpack there and think about and take away. I guess everybody would agree, AI is here. We're seeing it in the news. Not a day goes by where, somebody doesn't want to talk about how do I use Copilot to get more out of my business. Tell me about how can I process some invoices, using AI and, remove the person element for some of these tasks. But none of it is achievable. You can't unlock, the potential of AI without good data governance and, addressing the permission issues, the categorizing of your data and all of that. And the big call out, obviously, is if you're not sure on, how to get better at doing this sort of stuff and you need any third-party help, you can reach out to myself and Ben, and we're very happy to have a conversation. We're very happy to stay on the line for a bit longer and take questions. Appreciate that some people might need to run out the door soon. We will share the recording and all the materials after the fact, but if people have any questions, feel free to either raise your hand and we'll unmute you in order, or drop them into the Q&A button at the top of the page that you'll see here.
We've got a comment rather than a question, I think. We're looking there. Yeah, and I'd agree. I mean, Mark Tonks is put a bit in there and talking about it being a continuous loop, a constant loop, really, like an athlete, which is, again, exactly the fitness analogy. You practice and train frequently, and then you look to get better, smarter, faster, maintain that level of fitness. And I guess the key thing I do with organizations is helping them to understand what's the right level of fitness to aim for. Not everyone needs to be an Olympic athlete, but certainly to be in your field, depending on the regulation and things that you have around that, and the requirements and the competition you're facing and the customer's expectations, then I can help people to define and set what's an appropriate level of information fitness and then aim for it. And then you're quite right, Mark, that's part of the governance and the oversight. It's not just about putting it in place and hoping for the best. It's about, you've got to keep practicing at it and iterating it to sort of improve it and get it better.
Sure. To the question about how long does it take to move the needle on, if you're down at level 1 and you want to move to 6, 7 or an 8, I guess it's how big is the organization, how much data's out there, is it paper, is it digital? There's a lot of questions around that, but it's probably fair to say that you're talking in months rather than days or weeks.
Yeah, I mean, because even though I have available and can work with clients and they can select from the various elements of my toolkit in terms of templates and policies and procedures and things and tailor them, that does take a number of months. And then more importantly, it's about the embedding them and communicating them out across the organization effectively so that people understand them and work to them is the bit that takes a bit longer. But once you've done that, I'd say 3 to 6 months, depending on the size of the organization, is not unreasonable to sort of move the dial quite significantly to start with. Obviously, the fitter you get, then the harder it is to get slightly fitter than that, if you know what I mean. And you've got to judge the amount of effort you put into that as well and make sure it's worth it, which is, again, is what I help leaders with. Mm-hmm. And of course, you need to make sure that if you want to move the dial, you need that high level awareness and sponsorship as you do for anything else in an organisation. It doesn't move unless you've got the right sponsor at the top of it who understands it, why they're doing it, and make sure that people are aligned and go behind it.
I suppose if you truly are down at a one, there's potentially quick wins as well, like even putting in some basic policies and things like that.
Yeah, that didn't. I mean, I'm just taking a basic. I mean, again, and you've seen them, Adrian, from other work we've done, but I've deliberately designed them. I was fed up a long time ago of reading policies that are more than a page and a half long. So the ones I've designed as a set and the things around them are deliberately elegant, easy to read, quite easy to tailor and put in as a set into an organisation. And that, as a starting point to go from zero, if you've truly got no policies to one, then that can be quite a quick win, or you probably move up to 3 or 4 by doing that.
Yeah, that's right. So we're thinking data retention policies, and all of that.
Yeah. Information governance, classification, actually embedding it and getting them actually, you have to start somewhere. You put a policy in place, you're not going to have it fully implemented straight away, but at least then people know what they're aiming for. And over time, with the right oversight and the forums supporting it, you can then get to where you need to be. And that also applies to, I should say as well, the US clients I'm working with. They need to be both ISO 27001, which is information security, and also the extension to that, which is ISO 27701, which is the privacy extension to that as an ISO standard. And that's taking a bit of time because that's obviously a lot more detailed and specific as a standard, which I'm making sure that the framework I'm putting in place for them, I can point to exactly how that supports it, and they understand that as well. And we're putting the right controls in place, without going overboard, to make sure that any external assessors will be able to see that and work through it.
Sure. So look, I think we're probably a good time to wrap things up. So just on a very final slide, we've got our contact details there. If we're not already connected on LinkedIn, please hit us up and let's have a conversation. I'd just like to thank Ben for today's presentation. I'd like to thank everybody for turning up and for the good questions that we've had, and just leave it on me to say Mark just put his hand up.
I have to work out how to unmute him now.
Yeah, we can do that.
Or do we need Charlotte?
No. I will. Yeah.
Sorry, guys, press the wrong button.
Oh, I knew you had, but thanks anyway, Mark. Right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day. May the sunshine remain a little longer with us.
All right. Great stuff.
Bye-bye.
Cheers all.